Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good morning, how are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm doing well, Jack. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. I'm quite excited today. We have a visitor, a guest on the show today. So I'd like to introduce you to Rob Wilson. Rob, how about you introduce yourself rather than me doing a botched job of it?
No worries. Thank you, James. Yeah, look, I'm delighted to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast. I think we listen to every episode.
You are the fan, Rob.
I am. I think I am the fanboy of the pod. I'm like a child appearing on Blue Peter. So yes, I'm Rob Wilson. I am the co-founder and director of a company called Service Economics, the CX consulting and professional services firm. My background is I'm a former customer service and operations director at companies like Aviva, Marsh, RAC and Hyperoptic, and relevant to our topic of conversation today, I'm a former group systems thinking director at Aviva. That's me.
Very good. And that's a good segue because, surprisingly, we are going to talk about systems thinking today.
Well, in the interim, what have you been up to, James, since last week?
I have mostly been sitting in a traffic jam. Nottingham City Council have earned some money from the government for a big infrastructure scheme to improve the road work, and it's not working. So we'll just leave it at that before I start frothing.
Well, I wanted to give a shout out this week. I had a great experience from a small local company called The Art of Football. If anyone is a football fan listening to this, you should go and check out their website. They sell clothes, quite smart, stylish stuff. They're a small company based in Nottingham. Anyhow, we bought some stuff from them at their recent sale, and just the service they gave was excellent. So, Art of Football, worth a
When you
look.
say stylish, is that like sort of big
Not-
city cruise?
Not
stylish.
stylish, not stylish in your barber jacket stylish, but go and have a look. Let's see.
So let's start off then. Rob, what is the first rule of systems thinking?
Well, the first rule of systems thinking, James, is don't talk about systems thinking. So we're clearly breaking that already in the podcast. It is like Fight Club, Jimmy. I'll be honest, if you walk into any chief executive's office and say you want to talk about systems thinking, you just watch their eyes glaze over, particularly the head who are thinking, because CEOs want to hear action rather than the thinking stuff. There are people that do understand systems thinking, but they're a bit of a cult. There's lots of evangelists out there for systems thinking. And if you try and define what systems thinking is, I can guarantee that by tomorrow I'm going to be bombarded with people going, oh, no, it's not that you got it wrong. So it can be a bit of a minefield.
So in your view then, breaking the first rule, what is systems thinking?
Given that your audience are business people and kind of operational people, let's focus on what it means for them. There's two parts to systems thinking. The first part is about systems. Let's break it down. So what do you mean by a system? Deming defined a system as two or more parts working together to create a common goal. If you think about it as an example, car is a collection of random parts. Everything becomes a car when you put them all together to achieve motion. The human body is a good example of a system. Now, if I were to take James, lay him out on the table, chop him to bits into all the constituent parts,
If only.
then you'd have all the bits of James, but you wouldn't have James anymore. The very stuff that actually makes James, you wouldn't have. You have a collection of body parts. So the point is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so what you're interested in when we're thinking about systems is how different things interact to produce a result. So of course, organizations are systems. They're working towards a common goal, but very often they end up being a whole set of parts that are kind of acting in competition with each other, got their own different internal agendas, not working to a common purpose, and hence why internal competition, for example, can be a bad thing. So in summary, I would say that thinking about systems is about how everything is connected, understanding unintended consequences of making a change on one part of the system, and you can understand what impact it will have over there, and going from a very simplistic linear view of cause and effect, and again, it's kind of senior management thinking, I do this, problem to solve, do this, I get that, to actually understanding that much more complex and there are a lot more ripple effects of changes that you make, and the whole organisation needs to come together to deliver that common purpose.
I don't think most business people think like that. They think about their part, their function, and they worry about optimizing that, but they don't really worry that much about the effect that it has on the other parts of the business.
I thought you were going to say you had me at Deming.
Yes, go for it.
Well, in all seriousness though, Rob, I mean, this follows up really nicely from the episode we've recorded recently on the NHS, where exactly to that point, it's such a complex, big system that no matter how hard you try on one little bit, unless you're changing the whole system, you're never going to get a better outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's why so many change initiatives in large organisations fail, because people try to change their bit of the system and they try to optimise their bit, but ultimately that isn't going to optimise the whole. There are plenty of examples of where teams have tried to make themselves more efficient, but at the expense of a different part of the organisation.
I like your attempt at law explaining systems thinking's being two things. Part one is systems. So I'm guessing the second part is thinking. So what do you mean by thinking? Yeah. Myself.
So look, the thinking part is the bit that really excites me, because we start to delve into lots of psychology and just understanding people's belief systems, understanding why people do things the way that they do. And the reality is that a lot of management is actually done without thinking. People, in senior roles think that they should know what to do. They shouldn't have to kind of think about it. And very often it's like, well, we know the answer. Anyone that's read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, you're familiar with this concept of having our quick brain and our slow brain. And most of the day we're using these mental heuristics, which essentially is the shortcuts that go, well, sort of know the issue, and I don't need to kind of give it too much thought. And as managers, we've got so many inbuilt assumptions and beliefs and just stuff that we don't even challenge because we just turn up and do it. An obvious example might be the annual appraisal system. We'll obviously do annual appraisals. Every company that I've worked with is annual appraisal. But I go, well, why do we do that? What's the kind of the thinking behind it? What's the outcomes? And when you start to test some of those assumptions, you start to realize, well, actually, it doesn't work the way that I intended it to work. So challenging people's inbuilt beliefs and assumptions is fundamentally what the thinking part of systems thinking is about. But people don't like having their beliefs and assumptions challenged.
Well, I mean, it's hard work. Your Daniel Kahneman reference is really quite important. So for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a bit like when you learn to drive a car. When you first start, it's really hard work and you have to think about everything in quite depth. But eventually you get to the point where it becomes almost automatic. You do it without thinking. And you're right, a lot of what people do in business, they do without thinking. It's just hard work to see something from a different perspective. And I think that probably is one of the greatest barriers to what you're trying to achieve.
You're right. And any time you try to communicate with somebody, you're kind of hitting that set of assumptions and beliefs that they've got. And it's why trying to deliver change or influence through PowerPoint presentations is really hard, because I'm giving you my kind of story and you're receiving it through the prism of your view of the world. And whilst I keep telling you stuff that you're nodding along at, and Jimmy's going, yeah, you're right, this guy's fantastic. It's great. But the minute that I tell you something that doesn't quite fit with your worldview, it's really easy just to kind of throw that aside and go, I don't agree with the fit. So I'm going to ignore that bit. In reality, the only way that you can start to create effective change and change some of those beliefs and assumptions, people have to kind of see it and experience it for themselves. And that can be the first challenge, is kind of dragging people out of an office to actually go and see that thing that you thought worked really well in the real world doesn't work the way that you thought it does.
You talk about performance appraisal as an example of one of those sorts of assumptions. Is there anything else you would call out?
Well, I think in operational leadership in particular, and service organisations, there are quite a few things that we do which have their roots as management practices in manufacturing. But if you think back 50 years to the day where customer service was, I'd go into my local bank and talk to the bank manager to get a loan. It was very sort of personal, local thing. The guy used to come round to your house to collect your life insurance premiums. That was personal service. And then around 50 odd years ago, there was a guy called Theodore Levitt, a Harvard professor, who wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review and said, look, manufacturing has made all these massive advances over the years in efficiency, but we've never applied them to service. So why don't we apply that same logic to service? Because ever since then, service organizations have been trying to deliver that greater efficiency. They can go back to the 1700s, a guy called Adam Smith, in his book, The Wealth of Nations. And he observed work in a pin factory and saw that by splitting the work up into individual repetitive tasks rather than single people doing the whole job end to end, you could become much more efficient. From there, this idea about the division of labor came up in the kind of the production line. That's my thinking. Henry Ford is famous for any color car you want as long as it's black. So this kind of, we standardize stuff on the production line. The production line works really well and everything's been churned out the same. So standardization comes from Henry Ford. You've then got this concept of Taylorism, F.W. Taylor, who postulated that it was the job of the workers to do the work and the job of managers to think about the work. And you don't want workers thinking, that's the last thing you need. So managers will do that. And I know a guy called Richard Chase in 1978, again, another Harvard guy who wrote an article saying, look, the problem with customers is they keep getting in the way of doing the work. So he came up with this idea about front office and back office. Front office will deal with the customers, and the back office will do all the work uninterrupted by those pesky customers getting in the way. So all of those are examples that come from kind of sort of the world of sort of manufacturing industry that we've applied into service. And if you're a service technician, you can't do those things without thinking. But when you actually start to question, go, actually, do these things work? What impact does that kind of way of working, way of thinking have on customer service? And you see that many of the things that go wrong for customers actually have their roots in that kind of industrial way of thinking.
So I think there is a lot of good in all of those things. The problem becomes when you don't challenge what the bad is in them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting though. When you were going through the list, I was thinking perhaps almost the opposite of that, which is like, oh yeah, so that's why we do that way. Oh, that's why the whole back office, front office split, nonsense, absolute nonsense. It's that sort of thing where the bosses know best. In organizations today, you'll get the top 100 leaders together and they'll figure out the answers to everything. And then the other 20,000 people will just sit there and wait to be told what to do. And that's the best way of enhancing that human potential in that organization.
Yeah. But look, no one's saying that whether these things are good or bad. But I think having an understanding about why we do these things, I guess at least invites you to challenge, well, hang on, it's 2024, we're in the world of digital and AI, and we're still deploying strategies that were developed 250 years ago. Now, you can say a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a thing. And so it will at least make you curious as a manager to go, well, is there a different way of doing it?
So that all sounds very sensible. Yeah, so I understand systems like op thinking. Perhaps it manifests itself. What does that actually mean?
I think there are 6 main issues that you come across regularly in service organizations that I've worked with, which have their roots in that manufacturing mindset. So the first one is this kind of production line mentality. The work gets split up into smaller, repeatable tasks. Comes in from a customer as being a single demand. For the organization, gets turned into 5 or 6 different jobs. That's in a simplistic way. Recently, I notified my insurer of a change of address, and I have 3 policies, and I had to speak to 3 different people in order to tell them about my change of address. So that was kind of a production line based around that knowledge. For a customer, that was a real ball ache. It took me 40 minutes to do a job that should have perhaps taken 10 minutes.
Well, that search for efficiency actually cost the organization money because they took 3 people to do what one person could have done.
Yeah, exactly. And it manifests itself for the customer. You find that when work's being passed from one team to another, the first thing they do is kind of redo the work that's already been done. They go, oh, well, they've done their bit. They throw it back over the fence. It creates rework. It creates delays. So lots of the issues that customers complain about kind of have their roots in that production line thinking. The second one is then this kind of front office, back office split. And that's where if you've ever phoned through to talk to somebody, they're really polite and really helpful, but they can't help because they're not the people that can make the decision. Also, one of my favourite stories was when I was working in Singapore and I was working in the contact centre, and they would take information from a customer about a change of address And rather than inputting that information directly onto the system, they would pull up a Word document, fill it in with the new information, attach it to email it to the back office, because that was clearly a back office job to update the systems. Now, when we actually saw happening in the back office, we saw that it took much less time to input the information directly onto the system than it did to pull up the Word document, fill it all in, and email it off. So what they thought they'd been done from an efficiency point of view, or the dog ruins a back office task, was actually costing them more money. So there is a principle that says if you can get the work done where it first lands in the organisation, rather than handing it off, that tends to be much more effective for the customer. Probably, and this will lead us on to the next point, but probably somebody is looking at a KPI report that shows all our KPIs are green, we're turning around all our sales standard, everything's great here. So that's the next issue that I want to call out is the use of targets. People are being targeted. They tend to focus on the targets rather than focusing on the customer. I came across quite a good example on LinkedIn earlier in the week from somebody called up to renew their car insurance, and they wanted to change the payment card that they pay with, and the agent said, we can't change a card. We're going to need to set up a new policy. Now, it's quite possible that the individual concerned genuinely couldn't change the payment card detail. But more likely is that individual's got some kind of sales target they've got to achieve. And they see any kind of change like a renewal as opportunity to sell a new policy. When we first outsourced work to India, this was exactly what happened. Like, I remember the meetings where we were being told how great the offshore teams were, their sales performance and merge rate was so much better than the UK, what a great job it was that we'd offshored all this work. But they were doing exactly the same thing. They were looking for opportunities to cancel existing policies and then issue new ones. There's probably a whole separate podcast on targets, so we won't go into that now. But where you see that?
We've talked about it many times, Rob, and it's definitely, I think, all of us and probably most of the audience will have got used to that now, because it's just it just drives all the wrong behaviour a lot of the time. If you target stuff, you get exactly what you target.
Yeah. So I'll start throttling you talk about targets and then throwing in an incentive on top. I mean, for the love of God. But if you have a repeatable task that you want doing, making pins, for example, if you give somebody a target, it is without shadow of a doubt the best way to get them to make more of them. But the problem is people have picked up the best practice in one particular scenario and then applied it to a whole host of other scenarios without thinking about the implications, which I suppose is your systems thinking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Having said that, Rob, I was looking at our performance board this morning, and we were saying what are the things that indicate success for us. And one of the things was number of times this podcast is downloaded. And I'd taken my daughter to the doctor's appointment this morning, and she said, "Oh, your podcast's out today." And I said, "Yeah, have you downloaded it?" She said, "No, not yet, but I will do." I said, "Good, well done." She said, "I won't listen to it, but I'll download it." I was like, "Yes, that's all right."
The show you're listening to right now brings you insights to help you improve performance and enjoyment of work.
It takes a long time to produce, but we think it's well worth it. It's all in the name of helping you get your job done well.
All we ask in return is that you share the link to this show with someone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, click on follow the show wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
Okay, so the next one then is standardization. So about Henry Ford, any color as long as it's black. So this idea about we are going to standardize our processes. Well, that's great in manufacturing. But the problem with customer service is that customers are different. Customers come with all kinds of different shapes of request. So when you standardize stuff and then particularly use that standardization, actually build it into your technology, you kind of hard code the standardization. This is where you end up with the whole, computer says no mentality, because the rules have been set. The people you're talking to, whilst they can be very sympathetic to what you're telling them, they cannot help you. They can't deal with your inquiry in the way you want, because that's not the standard process. You also see that in those kind of IVR channels. How many times have you gone through an IVR menu and go, well, actually, there's none of those things. Yeah. There's none of those.
Which one's going to get me through quickest? I always do.
Yeah, it is one. Yeah, so this kind of belief that we can predict exactly what the customer's going to be calling about. And that in itself, again, once you mix that with targets, can give you some really kind of bizarre outcomes.
So standardizes all things in moderation. I mean, you try making light bulbs without standardization, you really are on a hiding to nothing.
Yeah. And what I'd say is, again, I think it's one of those real kind of key learnings that I've had in my career is that probably 80% of what customers are doing can be relatively standard. But there'll be that 20% that's not. And if you can successfully manage the 20% of non-standard stuff and absorb that into your operation and handle it effectively, you'll succeed. Where you try and ram that 20% through your standard processes, that 20% will create 80% of the noise in your contact center.
And that's also the art is where the actual value is. So where do customers want some variation, need something different, and it adds genuine value to them? And then, like you say, the 80% can all be standardized. But yeah, it is a real art form in identifying then and then managing those exceptions.
So that's next one. It's a lack of understanding about measures, for which we can potentially blame the education system. But on a daily basis, leaders in the business are getting presented with data. They're interpreting that data and making decisions based on that data. And yet very few of them really have the skills or the training to do that properly and effectively, to understand things like variation. Looking at numbers and going, well, is that a big number? Is that changing that number from there to there? Is that normal? Should I react to it? Do I just need to kind of leave it? Should I give it a couple more days? So first problem is wrong things get measured. You can talk about things like average handle time and so on in a contact center. And then the second part is the data gets presented in the wrong way. So you see all these reports of, this number has gone up since last month. But we look at that over the last 12 months, you go, well, it kind of goes up and down every month, and it kind of hovers around the mean. And that lack of understanding about variation, lack of understanding about data, variation.
The number of times I've stood in a monthly meeting trying to explain why a number's gone down when it's just noise.
Yeah, determining the signal from the noise. And then when that gets used perniciously, I have to say in many examples, to manage individuals. So you've got this contact center, and what typically happens is that there's some kind of average is used to determine if you're above the average, you're doing okay. If you're below the average, you're a poor performer. And if you're below the average, but still within what would be a normal range of variation, you're a loser. And bad things happen. You don't get the rewards that other people are getting. And so what happens is that people then don't want to be there next month. So they start trying to find ways to get themselves above the average. And that's when people start to learn how to kind of cheat and manipulate the data. And it all comes back to a lack of understanding about what's normal and what you should be reacting to as a leader. And when you do a training session and you ask how many of you guys have got a maths degree, how many leaders do you think put their hands up? And yet we're relying on people with that lack of mathematical training to be able to make quite important decisions about people, about business, etc., to actions they should take. So that's my number 5. Number 6 is this kind of Taylorist thing where managers are too far removed from the work. So you see management making decisions based on opinion, based on what they think happens, rather than real kind of detailed knowledge about what actually happens on day-to-day. But frontline staff are not being engaged in decision making, and therefore it's kind of a real sense of being done too. And good organisations, you see where they're involving the frontline staff, you're getting that kind of frontline feedback brought into the decision making process. So there you go. There's my 6.
I always find on that last one, well, absolutely I always learn more about what was really happening by going and seeing it and talking to the staff. And that was always more illuminating than some review meeting or some analyst pack or whatever it was, because often look at numbers, you see what do I want them to tell me rather than what they really tell me. When you're looking at it face to face, it's really hard to shy away.
I think it's interesting as well, because those 6 things interlink with each other, don't they?
You very rarely see those 6 things, only one of them being present. Typically, some degree of all 6 is there.
We've said these things work in manufacturing. Well, Do they or not? I mean, is it right to say that? What's your take on that?
All of those as management techniques or ways of working are kind of sort of proven, particularly where it comes to delivering efficiency in manufacturing. But there are key differences between making a car and delivering a service to a customer. The first one is that there's a customer involved in the service process. When you're manufacturing, the customer tends to arrive at the end of it. Whereas in a service, the actual demand starts with the customer. You want something and he's going to be involved the whole way through. The other thing that you're going to get in service organisations, which kind of doesn't really exist in manufacturing, is something called failure demand. So whilst that service is being delivered, the organisation itself is being peppered with failure demand contacts from typically the customer. And much of the work that's going on in the service organisation isn't actually delivering the service to the customer, it's in dealing with the failure demand. And in many service organisations, 50, 60, 70% plus of the work that's coming in is frankly work that shouldn't be there in the first place. So, I think that's two key differences. And then the other is back to this kind of variation point, which is that customers do all come with different needs and requirements. And what we've learned is that the most effective way to deliver service is to give the customer they want when they want it, as sort of close to what the customer's looking for as possible. Whereas the further you kind of deviate from that then tends to attract a failure demand, which creates more work and creates kind of more inefficiency. So it might work in manufacturing, but service is different. It's like taking a hammer to drill a hole. It's wrong tool for the job.
I think a lot of the problems exist in manufacturing as well. People not going down to the shop floor and not looking, people not asking people their opinions, people not understanding the numbers. So it's just a bit naive to think that, this works in manufacturing, therefore we should use it in the service industry, because there are these things that work in manufacturing either.
I think there's an interesting point, though, that manufacturing as an industry is a lot more mature than service as an industry. Like now the UK is predominantly a service industry, and it's over 80% of us are employed in service-related roles. And there's lots of talk about productivity and the need to improve the economy, but a lot of the time is spent on fixing stuff. And I know it's a lot less than the figures you quote, but even the government was saying that people are spending a quarter of their time putting things right. Well, if you could get that, even half that, the impact on the economy would be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, most service organisations that I've worked with, the biggest volume of work coming in is customers trying to chase up what's happening.
Yeah,
and how you're dealing with that demand is one of the big challenges I think for organisations. So focusing on reducing failure demand is kind of the service equivalent of reducing waste in a lean process, in a manufacturing process. Failure demand is the waste in the service process.
How would you summarize all that? What's the number one problem with the way we run our organizations, do you think?
Yeah, so I think one of the fundamental challenges you've got is we're not allowing our frontline people in particular to do the thinking that customers need. So let me give you an example. I was in a restaurant a couple of weeks ago, and there were 5 of us enjoying post-dinner coffees. And the waitress came over and said, "Would you like some chocolate truffles?" And thank you very much. She brought over a plate of 4. And there were 5 of us. So we said, "Oh, no, there's 5 of us. We have an extra one." She said, "Oh, no, they only come in plates of 4. So I could bring you another plate of 4," which she did. So we now had 8 between 5 of us. But it's a really great example of where the process was just obviously stupid. The waitress could see that. We could see that. And yet she was not allowed to deviate from that process. So I think not allowing individuals to use their common sense, this difference between doing things right, which is sort of the efficiency thing, versus doing the right thing for the customer. I think the other thing that really comes through is lots of times that we try to change the people rather than change the system. Yeah. It's really obvious that it's the system itself that's to blame. But part of that default management thinking is, I've got a problem with the people. And so if I can get my people to change, then that will change the result. And it's like productivity's gone down in my contact center. Across 1,000 people, productivity's going down. That's not because the people are doing something different. That's because something different is being done to the people. So systems thinking really is a way of looking at your organization through the customer's lens, because it's the customer that serves your purpose. It's about understanding how your organization works together to deliver what the customers need. And it's a way of challenging management thinking, challenging some of the assumptions we have about the way that things should operate, and realizing that the way we've always done it may not be the best way of doing it.
Excellent. So we'll come back next week and hear more about how you go about doing it.
Super. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Rob. Speak to you next week.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
From purpose to corporate jargon.
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So, if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
If your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com.
or James@jobdonewell.com.